Hello and howdy, everyone. I hope today is a wonderful Friday. I hope it's either been a really good Friday or I hope it's starting off well for you wherever you are. My name is Alyssa Nicoll, and today on Angular Air, I have these amazing two panelists with me, Justin Schwartzenberger. Hello, Justin.
Hey, what's going on?
And and Mike Brocchi. Hi, Mike.
Howdy ho, neighbor.
And we are so pumped to have with us as our guest of honor today, Juri Strumpflohner. Hello, darling.
Hey.
So, Juri, can you give a brief intro for those who might be new to the Angular community? For your who you
Sure.
are, what you do.
Yeah, totally. So I've been around in the I'm from Italy, northern, very northern Italy, just in the middle of the mountains, middle of the Alps. So my Friday is ending well. I'm already half jumping into the weekend. Really well prepped. And yeah, I've been around in the Angular community for I think that the first version was 1.3 of Angular JS back then, and then that I kind of picked that up, and I got sucked really deep into the community stuff. So and that kind of sticked with me, yeah. And so yeah, from there on, all the major Angular versions, jumping to Angular 2 and so on. I'm also a GD since a couple of years. And right now, I think, already 4 years now, I'm working at Narwhal. Now we brand ourselves more like NX, just NX. So that's a huge part of what I do day to day, which is kind of nice because I've been using it even before I joined the company. And so now I'm kind of helping push that forward.
Do you, weird question, how long has Narwhal been around?
How old?
Have they been?
I think it's now 7 years. I think so. I think it should be 7 years because I'm 4 years there. I've been using it 2 years before, and I know I've been on one of the first beta versions, so of an X specifically. So it's around 7 years, I guess, roughly.
Very cool. And I know some of the things we get to talk about are NX related, right? Like today in our episode, I know you'd said that NX18 is that out? Is it coming or is it out?
It's out. Yeah, it's out. Okay. Yeah, since a couple of weeks, just fresh.
Excellent. All right, chat. Let us know if you have any questions as we go. I'll bother Juri with them. But yes, do you want me to share your screen? How would you like to begin our discussion today?
Yeah, I can share the screen. 100%. Just move over here. Now I should see it.
Yes, with your very cool background.
This is from Raycast. I love their backgrounds. All right. So regarding, I think NX18 is one big theme today that you kind of wanted to talk about overall. What we tried this time around, first of all, those being in the Angular community and using NX, they were probably a bit surprised why there was a major release in February. We were usually pretty consistent, which kind of, I think, inherited a bit from the Angular community itself, from the Angular team. They're consistent in having those twice major release, a year. And we roughly usually always have that around April, May, and then around October. That's when we drop major releases. And similar as the Angular team does, we have migrations. So for us, also the major releases don't necessarily mean we're gonna break you, but potentially we might. Now the February release that we did around the beginning of February was a bit special because it didn't really have any breaking changes, but we made some quite big changes or enhancements to NX that we thought it's worth having a major, just to give it some weight basically as we push it out. And so we also tried to have our first launch week. So that's why I'm having open here that page, Launch NX, because a lot of the things that we can talk through today and discuss a bit are on this page, because literally here is all the major announcements that we had around NX 18. So it was Project Crystal. We had a new Nux plugin, so we're entering also the Vue community since over half a year. I think last year, sometimes end of spring, we had the Vue plugin, and now we jumped on Nux as well, which I really like. Kind of goes with the philosophy of also what Brandon does, with analog and stuff. So it's a really cool tech. We had NX agents. This is more our CI stuff that we offer, and like we had some really cool improvements there. And then Tasky, which is like that was kind of like a special announcement. So we're going to add some AI stuff, like everyone needs, right? We're going to have some AI stuff on CI. We've been wanting to do that for a while, but now we felt like it's a good point to like do some experiments and some stuff around this. And this is mostly on our CI offerings on NX Cloud. We've seen some opportunities there to kind of have AI stuff in there, like to analyze your workspaces, analyze how pipelines run, potentially suggest optimizations around basically that type of thing. And so we can dive into that as well. This is right now being looked into. Like we were kind of started working on this basically in February, and are right now actively working behind that. And then we had NX release. So that is also a big one for community, like having baked in release functionality within NX, like releasing in a sense of right now at least focusing mostly on npm packages, like packages in general, like not necessarily just npm. That was the first implementation that we gave, but like packages to registries, right? Where you need to version, where you need to provide change logs and all that stuff. So yeah, and that is kind of very high level, going over all the stuff. So that's where you can find that at launch.nx. Yeah, and then we can dive in, like either via questions, or I can just start rambling around stuff.
No, I will let you know if we get questions. I would love to hear more, though. I heard about. I think did we have someone mention Project Crystal already, guys, on the show? For some reason, it sounds very, very familiar. I'm like, so I'm excited to learn more because I'm.
Yeah, let's dive into that.
Mm-hmm. I
Like,
want to
what's
hear more
Project
about
Crystal all about?
Yeah, so I guess like the best is if I show some code editor. Let me move over here, project. Bump the font a bit. So how is that?
Yeah, looks good.
All right. So Project Crystal, it's kind of an initiative that we wanted to start mostly to make adoption of NX and NX plugins easier. For the Angular community, and that's like a thing that I'm going to talk a bit apart, like in relation with the Project Crystal. For the Angular community, that is not as much as a big deal right now in the beginning. We're currently looking into that. But a lot of the people that have been using NX outside of Angular, so in React, in Vue, or even just with pure TypeScript and JavaScript, they have been sometimes struggling with like potentially the more configuration-heavy approach of some of these things, right? Specifically when we talk about plugins. So in the Angular community, this is kind of like familiar things, right? This is very, very near to, like, this is actually almost the same as what the Angular CLI produces, for instance, for building your project by running builders. Now we call it executors in a product JSON rather than an Angular JSON. But apart from that, it's pretty much along the same lines. And adopting this for the community outside of Angular, like for React folks, for Vue folks, has been sometimes a bit of a struggle, especially if you have an existing project, right? Because you have to learn somehow how that configuration works. And we always had, or we still have, basically a more lightweight way of approaching NX, if you want, even though I kind of hate always the term lightweight, because that's sounding like there's like some really hard way as well. But basically is, if you look, this is like high level overview of what NX is about. Like this below here would be the very minimum layer. This is just NX. So there's literally just NX package, which you install. Like you can drop that wherever you want. Usually people do that in monorepos where they just want to run their package JSON scripts with caching, with parallelization, all that type of stuff. However, we strongly believe like that, like the plugins provide even more value on top, right? Similar to what we know from the Angular CLI as well. Like you have generators that you can run, scaffolds your project. Some of these builders here take away a lot of the burden, especially if it comes into upgrading stuff, right? It makes it much easier. And so we still believe this is like high value, but we wanted to kind of find a way of like, for someone not knowing this already, coming into using NX, wanting to adopt NX, maybe in an existing project, how would they approach it, right? And make this much more approachable and easier. So what we wanted to do, and that was kind of like the birth of Project Crystal. So for instance here, like this is an Angular application. And for now, for Angular itself, there isn't like Crystal doesn't change a whole lot. We're actually currently looking into how we can bring Project Crystal also to Angular applications within NX. Because as mentioned, this is already familiar for someone that uses NX and Angular itself, right? The configuration itself is not like a big downside or something that you would be worried about. But we still want to bring in some of the concepts that we bring in with Project Crystal. So let me show you directly on some example here what that means. Like here, for instance, this is like, I think a React application, if I'm not wrong. Yeah, it's a React application. If I open up the project JSON there compared to here, the Angular project JSON, this is basically empty. And so we could even potentially drop it at some point. We wanted to have it in here, like either you have a project JSON or a package JSON, but at least have some marker. This is like a project that NX should like look at and deal at and include in its project graph. But that was kind of like the whole idea. You don't have to configure a whole lot, but rather what we do, we want to come much closer to the underlying tool. So in this case, it's Vite. Like this is literally, I think this was a Vite CLI project, even how the Vite CLI generates it. And so we want to kind of be as close as possible to the underlying Vite config and rather use all the config that is specified in there. So the whole Project Crystal, and that's kind of like how we came up with the Crystal, which by the way, naming is so hard. We probably like the name was like we came up with the name probably a week before or something. Because we wanted to kind of convey the idea of like clarity and looking through, right? So rather than having something that abstracts too much, kind of get a little closer to the underlying tooling. And so this is how we kind of wanted to approach this. And so how does this work? The tasks that you can run for this project are still there. You can either run npx NX show projects, and then basically with, I don't know. Yeah, so let's say admin. Web, you would see here basically the targets that NX saw on this, which are available on this project. Now, usually, like this is the web view. So basically, on this project, on admin, it understood, like NX understands this is a Vite project. It has a Vite config. So these are the targets that you can run. And as a command underneath, you see it just directly delegates almost to Vite build, right? It doesn't do a whole lot of wrapping and custom logic behind, but it rather just directly delegates to Vite. And again, that is kind of like leaning to what I mentioned before, being as close as possible to the tool, meaning also that if you run into trouble or errors, like you can almost directly debug it on what Vite, like you can just run it with Vite itself as well, right?
Quick question.
Now, this is yeah.
So you mentioned that this was likely a Vite project to begin with that was brought in. Do we would you have the same thing generated if you were to generate this application through NX? Through those generators?
Yeah.
Okay, it would be heavily a Vite config with a pass through from the package or project JSON.
Yeah. The idea is to not basically cover too much of what is going on behind the scenes. So basically expose the Vite config, expose also the webpack config. Now it might come with some, like this one, for instance, maybe this one was also generated with an X. It could totally be, and the other one was brought in. But basically the idea is like, when we generate it, we provide you already some of the utilities potentially, but at the same time, you could also just generate the Vite CLI project and copy and paste it in almost. And NX would understand this is a Vite project, via the config, and apply the targets that it knows it can run, and that's it, right? Or pick them up from the package JSON if you have that already, right? Basically, if you would have like a Vite project, probably you don't have a project JSON, but a package JSON, so you could just pick up those scripts that you have in there, but you could also just delete that basically. Unless obviously you customized it, like those scripts, and just have an empty project JSON for now, and NX will pick it up. Now, what is the benefit basically? Well, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, you're probably. I was going to say one of the benefits, so maybe you're going to say it. So you can go ahead and.
Oh yeah. Well, the first obviously is like it's much easier to adopt, right? You can drop it in, and you don't have to do any weird like migration, moving files around. Like do it the NX way. Like we want to go away from do it the NX way, otherwise it doesn't work, kind of thing almost, right? The next one is also that it is able to automatically infer some of these settings and apply caching, right? Like that's one of the first things you want to do in a monorepo. So based on this, we can already infer like what will be like the output paths. I can actually bring up the targets here. Like the other thing that I showed before was the web view, but we suggest for like better dev experience, clearly, like if you have like NX console, for instance, installed and running, and same for WebStorm, then there is an icon here that you can click, which you can also click directly in Project JSON, and that opens up basically that view also within the browser. So here you can directly run stuff and get triggered as you have like seen before in a browser window. But for instance, talking about the output path and caching, you can see here these inputs and outputs. These are exactly what we're using when we cache this project, right? So we detect what are the inputs for this one, what are the outputs, and clearly also if I go ahead, for instance, change this here to admin, I don't know, test or something, right, and save this, it's going to refresh here, and you can see that it should here update it again. Let me see. All right, am I in the right project? All right, either I hit the bug already now, or let me see. Because that's one of the main issues here that we kind of, it seems like it. Build tweet. Okay, here now I picked up the product root this because that's the kind of the default. Let me see what that problem here was. All right. Now it seems like to have a lag here in terms of updating. So seems like a caching issue, which, you know, let me see. All right. Yeah, so it picks it up like this again. So that is like, it seems like a caching issue probably here, like in NX console, how it picks it up. But the main reason is basically, or the main advantage here would be, or is that you don't have to define this separately in an NX specific configuration file. All right, so we directly read the config from here, plugins that you might include, ports that you might run, and you can still override them, right? Because if you want for build like a different port, you either change it here. If you want to have a custom behavior where you don't want to rely on the Vite build, but you rather want to have some custom NX executor, because if you have already created one for Vite, you can still always go back to the previous behavior, which is also why this like NX 18 wasn't really a breaking change. So those things still work. Now, another thing is like, if you go, like, where are these plugins, right? These are directly in here, the NX JSON. So here, for instance, the Vite plugin, here's the ESLint plugin, and so on, Cypress, Next, and so on. So once you drop them in, you can also see here how the different targets are being picked up. So you can actually change the name, like this is not named build, but we want to name it like in some different fashion because we already have a build target and stuff like that. So it's more like we drop these plugins in. We also often use like the VS Code metaphor. It's kind of like if you have Playwright, you can run it in your workspace, but you can also just drop in a VS Code extension and it enhances your experience, right? It doesn't mean like you have to use it. You could still just remove the plugin and keep just running your commands as you did before. But once you have it in this case, for instance, that's the caching layer. It does like other potential stuff. It adds generators if you have some of them. That really depends on what the plugin provides, right? That can go in quite different directions.
Another benefit that I see from it is that when we spin up new applications in our repo, that new application process is easier or more lightweight because we don't have to have each one have its own config. Right now, it can inherit from that top level of these, right?
Yeah.
And that really comes into play when you're sitting there and going, okay, I'm going to do some upgrade, right? And maybe the build process for my 17 apps has upgraded. Like, do I have to go to all 17 and change their configurations, or now that they're all inheriting from the top, I change it in one spot and it trickles down. Now it's easier maintenance, right?
Yeah, exactly. It goes a lot into, overall, right, reducing the config, making it easier for someone that is potentially completely new, which like clearly if you're new and see like a huge config with JSON stuff in it, like it might be like scary, right, initially. And also like feel boilerplatey. And so we kind of want to kind of go a bit closer to that one. And this is one of the main things that we launched under the umbrella that we called Project Crystal, which kind of, this was almost like the foundation for other stuff that can now come, right? Like, because these plugins now are much more lightweight, you drop them on top. The existing plugin infrastructure still works. That's kind of the same thing, right? That still keeps going. But we are going to explore more in the direction of like, how can we make that whole plugin thing much easier, such that people that have this layer here, because that is easy to drop in, especially in an existing reality, like if you have already a workspace running that works and you cannot do just big bang migration, right? How they can drop in some of these plugins incrementally over time, right? Because you could go ahead and say, hey, now I already have a React application. Now I want to drop in the Angular one, or want to have like an analog application. I have an analog plugin. I drop that in, and it allows me to still keep running all the other stuff, right, while still benefiting from some of the new stuff.
So one of the things that I've been kind of trying to think through with the mental model, if you go back to the other screen where you have the breakdown of the plugins, right? So you're talking about the executors, right? We just talked about those. Is that correct? Yeah.
Yep.
And then we also have this concept of generators, and I want to make a package of code generators that I want to use in my repo. Now, those would go into a plugin as well, correct?
Yeah, exactly. That notion doesn't change at all. So basically, even here, if we look here at the NX JSON and we talk, for instance, about that Vite plugin, that is literally the Vite plugin that was always there, right? It's just the registration mechanism changed. Like before, you were kind of just as you do right now as well, right? You install a Vite plugin in here. Where is it? Here, right? That brings in all the functionality of like executors, generators, whatever that author provided. Like in our case, this case, like this is us writing this one, so we have also generators in here. So if you go NX console and say like, let me generate some Vite configuration of Vite application, you can have like that in here, right? Similarly for the React plugin is also dropped here, so you still have all these functionalities, even though also the React one here is already like a Crystal plugin. And clearly the other things that you had before, like the whole Angular generators and stuff, that remains the same. So it's almost just like the registration mechanisms of these plugins changes, so that you don't have to have for every file in here, basically for every application, have basically a full-blown config, but rather these are being applied to your project automatically, and you only add them in explicitly. Basically, you override them only basically if you need to change them. So that's kind of like the high-level mental model there.
What happens for a person going from like 16 to 17, 18? Like, does that, like, are there just like docs and then you have to like do the migration yourself? Or when you update it, like suggests this new way of like configuring things? Like, what's the flow?
Yeah, you can just keep going as you did before. So with the NX 18, we didn't provide any automated migration in the sense of like us detecting this is a default config, so let's just remove that because that's already being added by the plugin, right? We're currently looking into that because we didn't want to disrupt any flow. Now, this is still valid code. It still works. We're not going to drop any of that. And in particular for Angular, we didn't even change this at all for now. We're right now basically looking into how we can optimize this. And there's a discussion on our GitHub going on where some of the community members also proposed approaches how this could look like, right? Because it could go to the point where we say like we want to use just directly the Angular CLI behind the scenes, just as we trigger the Vite CLI, right? So, or it could just go in the direction of like we just want to be able to help folks reduce the configuration overhead, as Justin said, so you don't have to duplicate that across all the projects, but you rather just have, well, let me define the Angular plugin that defines the build. The build is like 99% always the same, apart from that single project there. Well, there I override it, I customize it, but the rest of it stays the same, right? So basically reducing the whole configuration overhead that you might have. But we are currently kind of brainstorming and implementing POCs to see what would work best. Because again, like as I mentioned initially, we never really heard that complaint from the Angular community because it's pretty much accustomed to having such configuration, right? It was mostly for someone coming out from outside the Angular community, which comes in and sees the configuration style like, this looks weird. Like this is completely different than what I'm accustomed to in like a package JSON script or my custom script, right? But it clearly provides benefits also for the Angular community itself, right? As said, the first one absolutely being like reducing boilerplate code, for instance, across all the projects.
So it's interesting. Like if I'm thinking about and I say I've got my repo, I want to make some custom generators. So now I'm going to make a plugin because that's well, if I run the scripts, right, it's going to make a plugin, and then I'm going to add generators to the plugin. I'm wondering about like how do I, as the owner of that repo, start thinking about like if I'm going to need some generators. Should I mean, not generators, if I need some executors, do I start thinking in terms of, okay, the plugin I've already created for my repo that for generators, do I go and add executors to it? Do I go and add these additional scripts to it? Or should I be thinking in terms of partitioning that out and saying a plugin for my generators, a plugin for my executors?
Yeah. No, I would still keep it as part of the same one. Like there's not really, like you could always see like the plugins that you already have now prior to NX18, right? They just get another addition to them, which is the registration as like, let's call it Crystal plugin, right? But the other functionality they already have, they're still valid. You might port or even reuse some of the functionality of the, like generators are perfectly valid 100%, just as you had before, because they're still being run the same way. The executors might be something where you might either want to make it more lightweight, right? You can maybe drop some of the things because now you have the ability with that new API to hook onto the vconfig, the webpack config, and just do some modifications, but then trigger the webpack build, and that's it, right? And so you just like adjust some of the settings of how you invoke that build and things like that. But other than that, nothing really changes as far as now, right? So you can still have that single package. I wouldn't spread it out because then it's much harder for people to discover it, right? Because they still want to use your plugin, and that is still a plugin as it was before an NX plugin. It's also now a plugin. There's just a registration mechanism that kind of changes if you want to provide Crystal plugins, right? That kind of approach.
We have a question related specifically to this, and then we've got a couple that aren't related. Thomas asked about any official tutorials or documentation that help turn plugins into Crystal plugins.
No, not yet. That's exactly something that we were currently working on. Like to provide, basically, we have a section of extending NX, I think, on our docs. And so that is something that needs to be built out now, right? So to make sure, because right now we launched it, we tested on a couple of projects. We saw it kind of works on a lot of these, like Angular kind of executed for now, but that's being worked on at the moment. And so we want to be confident of like how we can communicate that and how we can build up the extra material around it, like how you can like migrate from your existing plugin structure to also provide Crystal functionality and so on. But I know there are already a couple out there, like apart obviously from looking, like if you already want to start now, looking at the NX source code, like at NX Vite plugin, React plugin, and so on is probably the best, because there you see the existing generators, existing executors, as well as the new plugin way of registering these like Crystal plugins. And we also know that Tina, for instance, that provides community plugins for Spring Boot, so Java actually on top of NX. I think he released, or is about to release, I think he released this week or last week, an update to his plugins where he now provides also like a Crystal functionality. So basically a more lightweight way of kind of hooking into the project. Yeah, who reads source anyway?
Josh,
I was about to say who reads docs. It's usually who reads docs.
No one. They have their screen readers read
exactly.
it to them.
Exactly.
We had two more questions. Josh asked earlier, has there been observable performance improvements? I heard that using Jest gains some performance.
I don't have numbers specifically for that. Projects are now more performant because it's kind of like we just mostly changed the way we invoke things. So I don't have numbers on that. Maybe we gained some more performance because there's less wrapping, but like I don't think so. But I would have. I cannot provide like 100% answer there. It's for us. It's more the possibilities that it gives. Like one thing, for instance, that we can dive into as well, like is something on the NX agents, and we added like is the whole. And I released a video a couple days ago about end-to-end test splitting, for instance. That was just something that almost came out by accident. We saw like, oh, wait a minute. Now that we can generate these tasks, we can actually split things up. Like, for instance, I think in here, I have some Cypress and Playwright tests. So this, for instance, this usually end-to-end tests that get generated for an application that we usually provide when you set up a new app within NX. And I have a couple just Playwright tests here, but same thing holds for Cypress. In fact, like further down here, I think a Cypress test. You just add in a couple of these tests. I just copy and paste them here to have a couple of them. But now if you go in here and you look at the actual targets that get generated, since we generate them, we can actually generate one run per file, potentially, and automatically, without you having to specify it. In fact, there have been some folks before that did that manually. Like in their project JSON, they basically specified different targets for subgroups of files and just bundled them together to speed up things to get better performance on CI mostly. And so now that we have those targets generated anyway, and Cypress as well as Playwright provide, for instance, these these flags where you can provide a single file and it would just run the whole test against that single spec file. We just went and generated this, right? And so in combination with the NX agents part, we haven't talked about yet, but like the whole distribution on CI, for instance, this is like huge because now you can run these individually on different like machines on CI, right? And parallelize much better. But this was almost like this came out by accident. So we saw this halfway through working on Crystal and was like, now this is possible to remove all that boilerplate that we had before to manually set this up and kind of generate this on the fly.
And we have one more question currently from Thomas. Any news on when if NX is going to use the native configs for Angular and Nest?
With native configs, you mean basically having here the actual Angular JSON file, right? Is that a question? Because like that is something we're currently exploring. Because like maybe just at the high level, like how do we end up with project JSON files? Because initially, even NX had a single Angular JSON at the root of the workspace, and that was exactly the same as the Angular CLI config, right? And so when we work with like big clients, like what we saw is like you ran into a lot of merge conflicts because people just work on different branches, merging into the same file, adding project, moving it around. So one of the big requirements or one of the big asks was kind of, could you split that up per project, right? So because in the end, if you think about the Angular CLI config, you also have a project node and you have all the projects in there, which are kind of just configs for all these different apps and packages, whatever you might have in such a workspace, right? And so that is kind of how the project JSON got created. So we started splitting it up, moving it into a single project JSON files. And doing that, we also changed some of the nodes. I think there's just a couple, actually. Like there's the targets one, which is called architect, I think. And then there's the actual executor here, which is called builder. And that was just us, an attempt basically to say, let's kind of normalize the language such that someone not being inside the Angular community, also being from outside, kind of understands what's going on, which like targets is much more familiar if you mention the term compared to like architect or something like that, right? And so that was kind of like the change that we made. Now, obviously, with Project Crystal, if we look, for instance, at Vite, we don't have a project JSON anymore. We just have the Vite config. And so clearly one direction, in fact, like that discussion that we have, and I can maybe find the link later to show it on our NX repo, there's a public discussion from Lars, I think, that provides some like basically kickstarted the discussion of how could Crystal look like for Angular, which is something that we currently look into. To understand like what would that be like? Do we want to have a single root level Angular JSON again, or rather not, because we know already the pain points that might potentially have like in large repos? Do we want to have here instead Angular JSON files, single ones for each app, right? But that be exactly the same as Angular CLI would create. So those are some of the points. And if you have feedback, definitely let us know. Chime into that discussion. I'll try actually to bring it up here so we can maybe share it later. And we're also at ngconf. So come by our booth. We're actually eager to hear what or how you want to see that. Which direction you want to have that go. But yeah, we're thinking about it basically, yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you. Sorry, I derailed you with all of the questions. They were piling up.
No, it's fine. It's fine.
Thank you. So we haven't talked about, at least not in depth, agents yet. And I know that was on the list of things I wanted to hear more about. But then I didn't know if you were in the flow of something else as well. I know Josh is less than 5 days away from ngconf. Are you going personally? Like, will you all be there? I know
I'm
Mike's
not.
Be there. Yeah,
I'm not. Like, we're having our third baby in a couple of weeks, so I've got our business going at the moment. But there's a lot of our team will be there. A lot of our team will actually be there.
We will miss you, but that is very understandable because you don't want to be away for that.
That's gonna be fun. No, it's too close. It's too close to fly overseas to the other side of the globe. But yeah, a lot of our people will be there, and we actually have or might have some POC specifically going in that direction of seeing Angular and Project Crystal and how that could work together. So that's why I mentioned like we're eager to hear feedback from you all. Like if you are there, chime by our booth and let us know, and then and discuss with my teammates there.
So
But yeah, go ahead.
So we have the executors, right? And there's are the executors contain like scripts that we want to run as well, or is there another term for those? And I'm assuming that those probably kind of start lining up with this agent stuff as well. Like if I wanted to create, some scripting tooling that I want to use, or some commands that I want to run in my repo, isn't there a model for that to do that in my plugin?
Yeah, so basically, if you want to just run custom scripts, the normal way of running here, like a run command executor, that still kind of works. Like that's the same thing that already worked before. So you can just have like a run command executor and have your script basically in there. In fact, like a lot of these here, let me see whether we see it right in here. It doesn't show the executor, I think. No, it doesn't. But basically, behind the scenes, it runs directly just a run command, basically with this script, which is vite build. So that is still possible. Now, the question is more like, do you want to provide that as a functionality of your plugin, of your NX plugin? Well, then you would wrap it inside your plugin and then basically provide it like as an executor as I did before, either exposed via the Crystal plugin, the Crystal way of registering it, or just as a normal executor.
And then those executors don't need to be necessarily like to build our app or to serve our app. We can think about them to do any other things that we might need to do, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Like an executor in the end is just a wrapper around an npm script, right? It's just because like it's kind of almost a small abstraction around an npm script, because you might behind the scenes, because you're in a monorepo or some stuff, do other things, right? So it's always almost like a way for you to organize that into like a proper like JavaScript file, like all that stuff, like do pre-config stuff, read from the NX API, for instance. You might need to run the executor, you might need to gather like the actual product graph to understand what are my dependencies. So things like that is usually what you pack into that. But in the end, then it just runs a script that you just built. Like in this case, before our executors were much more, or some of the executors were much more heavy in the sense of that they were digging into the lower level API of running like the directly triggering a Webpack built via the actual API of Webpack, versus now we try to just do the high level configs before and then read the Webpack config and trigger the Webpack build, for instance, directly. So that is kind of the way, the main way that changed. But for the rest of it, it remains the same.
Yeah, because I could see, like, let's say I want to build a tool, a script that I want to analyze my Angular app and display a list of all the route paths, right? And so before I would just make some folder in my thing and make a node script and start writing the code and do that. And now this kind of gives me a home. I go, okay, I'll make a new executor. I'll do all that script logic there. And then now I get all the hotness of that executor will show up in the tool that you showed, right? The NX console will show it as an option. And now it's easier for somebody to go run that and be successful with it, right?
Yeah. That is not something we changed. That already was possible before. Like you could even do that before. Like if you go to extending NX, which I mentioned briefly before, and you say like create a plugin, let's say local executor or something, like this one here walks you through how you would create a new plugin. Like there's a generator for that, so it sets that up for you. And then you just have that live, let's say, inside your workspace, or you publish it, like depending on how you want to share it. But it could also just live in here. And this one could then contain such executors, contain generators, and so on. So that thing didn't really change. That is still the same, right? Like that didn't change. So even before, in fact, like a lot did that, where they bundled in their usual tool / some node script kind of thing into an executor in a local plugin, just lives in your workspace, where you provide that such that like your own apps can use that, right? And then you can always decide to actually publish it out, share it internally in other repos, or just like use it within the same repo you are in. The only thing which as we mentioned before briefly, that we didn't update yet here is to how do I now also provide the Crystal functionality. So how can I automatically, if you register my plugin, let's say in that NX JSON up here, right? How can I provide such functionality that I can hook onto certain files, right? Because you could have, I don't know, like maybe you want to augment what could be like README files, for instance, like MD files. You want to pre-build them. You could listen for those files and then provide functionality to those where you can build them automatically with node inputs and outputs and stuff like that, right? So that is the thing that is currently being worked on to provide updates and relate to that, like having some guides around that. But all the other things that are on here are still valid. Like they didn't change. So you could still already do that before.
For things like that,
So
is it usually that they happen automatically, or does the dev still have to prompt them to happen? Like with the README example.
No, you have to run it, right? So either like if it is a generator, it would show up here in your local generators array.
I was just imagining like working on a repo with one that's like, oh, we're gonna rewrite your README, and then I'm like, what's happening? Like, why is this?
Oh, no.
So
you would have to trigger them. Like you would
always option. It doesn't just okay.
Exactly. So you would basically use either VS Code, like the plugin, to show it up here. Well, now I'm not in a plugin in a project like this here, where it would show up here, basically, right? Because even if you look at this one here, we're looking at one of the projects here in the workspace, and it has targets like building, serving, previewing, serve static, but then it has the test and linting as well. Like the linting is not something that the Vite plugin does, right? So this one has been added because there's also a lint plugin here installed, and that lint plugin specifically looks for ESLint configs. And so if it finds one, it adds that target also to the project, so you can now run that one too, right? So that's that functionality is the Crystal specific plugin. How you run that behind the scenes, how you implement that, well, that is kind of like the same thing as before. That didn't change a whole lot. Like there's some API, obviously, how you can create these nodes dynamically, while before your developer would even had to add them in here, or you would have to generate them at the project setup basically, right? And now you don't do that anymore, but you rather hook that in dynamically once you drop in the plugin. But you would trigger that, yeah. You would run it in some fashion.
All right, so how do the agents come into play?
Yeah, the agents is like our answer, if you want, for distribution on CI. So we always had like distribution on CI, but the problem before was like you had to kind of provide the machines. So we had the DTE that we call like distributed task execution with NX Cloud, where you would have like your Circle CI config, you would provision the machines, you would kind of have those different steps and give that to NX Cloud. And so NX Cloud would know, well, I have those 3 machines. I would just do the orchestration. So knowing how the product structure looks like, it would split them up and then like assign them to various agents in the most efficient way. And NX agents now, the difference there is this is now part of our infrastructure. So this is part of NX Cloud. So I can actually, let me show visual stuff is usually better. So basically, it's this scenario where, let me just scroll down. Something like this, right? Where you have basically the agents before they were sitting here on your infrastructure, on your Circle CI, on your GitLab, whatever. Now they're living in the NX Cloud infrastructure. And this gives us a couple of different advantages. Like, first of all, we now have full control of spinning up machines or shutting them down, right? Based on how big your PR is. So we can do things like, well, if it's a small PR, you're just going to need 2 machines because that's enough to handle it and still be at an acceptable speed, like the whole CI. If it's like a huge one, because you change some of the core dependencies, well, we will spin up like 5-6 machines to make sure you're still within that same, like let's say 10-minute-ish kind of thing that you want to have, like in terms of speed for your CI. These types of things, right? The distribution model also changed a bit. That was also, as I mentioned before, thanks to some of these Crystal things. Like, for instance, we can split up here the various like tests automatically. So that helps us also to split up like those huge big blocks usually into more fine-grained stuff. And basically then you can kind of hook it into your infrastructure. One big plus of the NX agents also is that the whole setup now clearly got much easier because you don't have to provision machines anymore, right? Mm-hmm. So if you look at the typical kind of, this is like an example, small CI script clear because this is just like a demo workspace, but you might have your like things that you need to do beforehand, like in prepping your CI run. But at a certain point, you then will have like something like this, right? Where, let me make it a bit smaller. You will have basically an instruction to NX Cloud saying like, start a CI run. So start monitoring this run of NX commands. You mention the number of machines you want to distribute. Like in this case, I don't do any dynamic distribution. So I just say, well, use 5 machines. That's it, right? I could have this dynamically pointing to a file, and that one has the logic of saying small, big, and large ones have like a different number of machines. And then basically I just, here this installation stuff, so npm packages clearly and stuff, and then you just run NX commands, right? And so this, like by being able to reduce it almost to like a single line here, or not just almost, but reducing it to a single line, this helps obviously make the CI part much more convenient, much faster. And if we, let me actually show the.
And then we're not really doing any configuration on the cloud side, right? NX Cloud is taking care of that.
No.
So
yeah,
we're really
because in the end, like
here, lightweight. Yep.
Yeah. Because in the end, it's just running the distribution across these machines, right? It's not doing anything custom, because you keep doing that here. Like if you need to, I don't know, run these commands and then pick up the dist folders and move them somewhere, or upload test results to some analytics tool, right? That still works. Like you just keep doing that below here. Because one of the main parts, one of the main points of what we can do is, if I bring back here the file I had open before, I might have closed down. We will, like all these things run on these machines, but in the end, we will stream back all the results to that single CI file, that single CI agent on your end, right? So you will still get all the files here basically in the end, and get them back. And so that allows you to do all the custom logic that you might have and integrate there. And so if
on that, if you go back to that,
yeah, go ahead.
Other file. So they're on
This one?
How do you know what line it is? Line 2 down there at the bottom. I guess it's
yeah. Sorry.
Wait, what?
I don't know what wizardry that is.
These are relative files because there's the Vim plugin active, right. So it just moves around. But yeah.
So 31, next one down.
Relative.
Yeah.
Line 32, yeah. So the lint test build, those are the executors, right? That we talked about earlier.
Yeah, exactly.
And then
they can be either the yeah. You just run them as usual, like you give them the commands here. Now I have here run many. Probably you would want to have like affected here or something to just run those that have been changed in this PR or something. I just ran here run many to have like multiple runs, such that like I don't have to keep changing files basically.
So then if we had
that's basically
our README one, right, and we created a README one that auto generates READMEs or something, then we would just come in here and we'd add the whatever that we named it, build READMEs.
Yeah, exactly. This is just a short way.
They're not chained. There's not a way to be like all of them, and then it just like fires them.
It kind of is.
I'm assuming each of these are like. Oh, okay.
Yeah, if you run these, for instance, right, they run in parallel, right? So you can see it runs the linting, testing, building of all these projects in parallel. It just like tries to schedule them based on whether there are dependencies or it needs to pre-build first another project in order to run yours. So it kind of structure or parallelize them that in a way of considering also project dependencies, but they run in parallel. The difference is like this works until like this is a small repo clearly, right? So I could just run these and that's it. You don't need any distribution at all, clearly, not even caching, right? Because the whole point is like once this grows to a larger monorepo, right? You want to not just run it on one CI agent, but you need to kind of split it up into different ones. And so either you do that, and I've done it a couple of times, you do that kind of manually, where you try to just split them between the types of like, let's run builds on one machine, the tests on the other, or just mix them based on your projects. But the problem there is like, it might be optimal initially because you kind of clearly fine-tuned it, but then as the project structure changes, as you add more projects, it gets out of hand, right? So that's kind of the main issue there. And so therefore then the distribution becomes again suboptimal. You have one agent maybe or one machine waiting because it runs the lint super fast and the others run the test for like the next 10 minutes. And your whole CI run is the 10 minutes because you have to wait until everything is completed, right? And so that's the whole idea behind allocating machines and running these not just in one machine as we did here, but run them basically across machines, right? So that's what we're doing here. Like
put that fine-grained like per like project or per like build and test, like where do you put that is that inside the projects themselves or is that in here, like that you specify how you want it to like group the CI like where if you wanted to do what you just said, where would you do that?
What do you mean? Yeah. You could just set up multiple of these jobs here, right? Quite brutally, and then say that, well, in one I just run the builds, right? And the next I just run the lint, and the other one I just run the test, right? Or I've even seen, and then you would split by that would be like how you would set it up, right? You would just not run all of them, but like split them up and say like, let's run the build here, just to make an example. The build, and then pass the -p, which is a filter where you could say of project 1, 2, 3, or like a subfolder or something like that, right? So you could kind of cut it down and say like all project, like if you want to do it by project, right, you could do that, right? Or just say build lint and test of just project 1 or subfolder 1. I think we even support folder globs. So it would pick up just the folders, like the projects in that folder, subfolder glob, which can be a strategy, right? But it's the problem is always it's usually is suboptimal, right? Because you never know how long that's going to take. Also, how many projects are being affected. That's the next thing, which is like maybe that project just has one. You just touched one node in that project, one single one, right? And the other ones have a lot of projects to compile, and so therefore, then in the end, you would end up like one waiting, and the other one kind of keep processing behind the scenes. And there was the main thing that we tried to kind of simplify. So you don't have to kind of duplicate all these jobs and manage it and kind of fine tune it over time, but you rather just have mostly like a single line where you enable this here. We say you manage the machines. I want you to have 5 machines. These are the commands you need to run. Just go do it, right? And so if I have this graph here, like we can actually show this. Let me see, because if I go in here, I just need to invalidate because otherwise it's probably all cached. But if I say here, this test, and this would change something in here, which would invalidate the cache for all these projects, right? And so let me see if I do. Cache, whatever, and then we push this up. Should have a run up here.
I think your words per minute might actually be faster than mine. And I'm proud of my words per minute. So your typing skills, man.
My characters per minute are pretty fast. Rather than have to spell any words.
How fast is it?
Spelling is really where
I can hammer the keyboard really fast.
There are those funny online type racer, or how are they called? Like games where you can kind of race against each other with typing. It's been a while.
Yes. I was such a nerd. Like that was one of the first computer games I played, was like a typing game. Like
what was the typing of the dead? There was like typing of the dead, right? Where it was zombies and you had to type words to like kill zombies.
Oh my god, that would be so much fun. Mine was just a basketball typing game. I would have loved zombies.
Next week, Alyssa, you and I type racer.
Yo, you were going down.
Type racer?
Yeah, I probably will.
I am so proud.
That's a good one.
I am so proud of my typing skills.
Do you have to bring your own keyboard for that competition though? Is it like, this is my gear, this is how I operate, right? Like, don't give me no other keyboard.
I'll be on a laptop.
Mike will show up with one of those partition keyboards and be like, go Alyssa. He'd be like, what?
Oh, that's true. Do you do that, Mike? Is he like one of those keyboard people with his? I don't know if my brain could get used to it.
Not physically split.
Yeah, it is one of those. Yeah, good break content. Yeah.
I think like StreamYard sucks up all
GitHub's not down. Wait. Is it
No, I hope it's just me. I hope it's just me. Like,
everyone go and check that GitHub is not down.
GitHub's not down.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, no, it looks like I'm
hyperventilating for a minute.
Like my internet connection is completely.
Oh, cool. Your internet can go down. That's fine.
Whatever.
It won't be on the show.
Actually, what we can do, we can not show it
GitHub
here.
going down.
But you can try if someone else wants to share. Like we can actually show it like on just the NX repo if you want, because it doesn't seem like I cannot even push up my code here. If you want, you can.
You got it, Alyssa, or you want me to?
Just to kind of bring the full circle, like
Mike, you do
when
it.
we talk about Crystal, right, and getting these things aligned with Crystal and opening the doors with that. I feel like what I see is then with that in place, it empowers the agents and that whole thing to be even more smooth, because now you kind of have everything in this NX kind of realm. and that's what makes the agents and handing all that stuff off to the NX Cloud start working, because now everything's kind of in line with this pattern of Crystal and all that stuff. Does that sound correct?
Yes and no. Like to some degree, yes. But like even if you have, like, let's say you have an existing monorepo or something, you don't use any plugins at all. You just like drop in NX to run your package JSON scripts and cache them. That would already work, even for distribution on NX agent. Yeah, that would still work, because NX agents, like NX Cloud, what it needs is just from NX the product graph, the project you want to run. That's it. So if you run, for instance, NX run many build, right? But you don't have any plugins, you don't have any package project JSON files, but you just have package JSON files, you would pick up the build scripts in the package JSON files as valid projects and just run those basically and distribute those. Where Crystal definitely comes in is, as I said before, like the end-to-end test splitting, which was one of the cases that we found. It was like, oh, this is actually cool. We tried out. Where the Crystal plugin does a little more than just give you the target, but it does also give you targets for each file, for instance. So, right. So that is where Crystal comes in, that dynamic allocation of these targets. But that's almost it, right? Because then in the end, for the NX agents and NX Cloud, it's still the same thing, right? It just grabs all the tasks that it gets, right, which are now much more fine-grained, and it distributes them based on the knowledge it has, right?
Knowledge it has. Makes sense.
So yeah, the thing that I wanted to show is just like, if you go through some of the pull requests, for instance, let's hope someone is working, but there should be folks working. Like if you click on the first one, for instance, let's see, and then you scroll down, you see that if you scroll a bit up, you see the NX Cloud report, and if you click here, click to track the progress. Yeah. Then we jump in. This is the NX Cloud dashboard, right? And so here, if you click on the in progress one, we should already see like this going. If you scroll a bit up, yeah, it's currently running through, but we don't see any graph yet because it's just kicking up. It runs since 40 seconds. And I don't know what column changed here, but basically what you would see in here is you actually see a visual representation of how this is being distributed. So you see the commands that come in, you see like all the different machines that are spinning up, what command is running on which machine, and then it goes from there.
Wow, that's witchcraft.
The NX Cloud is awesome. It's awesome.
That is so slick. I've not seen this before. Wow. That was cool. Does it afterwards, like when it all finishes, does it leave the report there? Like of the
yeah. If you go here and just if you click at the top at the navigation bar, there's NX open source repo. Yeah, exactly. This one here, yeah, this is a project basically that this is the NX Cloud dashboard for the NX open source repo, and so you could go somewhere here in one of the in progress or one of those that succeeded, and there you would then see the logs for the single files, but you would also see them back at your Circle CI, whatever you're using. I think that is a major point as well, which is important. Like we don't want to, like you don't want to have to go and search the log in the agent where it ran, right? You want to have that back at where you started it. So that from your perspective, if you run it on CI, you don't even notice almost that it was distributed. Because if you look at your Circle CI logs, you will see them come in there as you would run them on one machine, basically, which also allows you then to pick up files that you might have produced as part of your script, move them to some deployment environment that you can do and keep doing the things as you did before. That doesn't really change, but it's faster, right? So that's the whole goal of NX Cloud is to make it faster, basically. Distributed action central findings. I'm gonna note that down for the next talk.
Josh is always the witty one. We are approaching the top of the hour. Was there anything else you wanted to hit on? I know we talked about NX18. We talked about agents. We hit on Project Crystal. Was there any other important bits?
No, regarding product agents, like NX agents and Crystal, like if my internet connection works next week, we are having a live stream on next Tuesday. So if you go to our YouTube channel, there will be me coding and Victor watching over my shoulder. So that's gonna be fun. But we're basically going through a project, creating a project, talking through like what is going on behind the scenes of NX agents, like how they work, and actually create an example, push it up to GitHub and run it through and kind of do some coding, talking and answering questions. So there we can go much, much deeper on that one. There was still NX release, which we didn't talk a whole lot about. I'm super excited about it. So you can just go to launch -NX on our nx.dev page, so nx.dev/launch-NX. There's like a video talk from James Henry, which worked mostly on that feature. He kind of led that effort, which is a really good one. And some blog posts around that, like how that works. There's more coming there because like, that was just the first public release. But we already have, I think, an example where we release Rust packages. Like the NX release mechanism is generic. So we implemented the JavaScript version of it, but you could deploy other packages, even applications at some point. So I'm really excited about that one.
Thank you so much for coming on. Do any of you gentlemen have a pick for today? It can be something in the tech community or something completely unrelated.
I do. It's a show, new series on Netflix called The Gentleman. It's a Guy Ritchie thing. If you're into Guy Ritchie stuff, it's pretty
Who's
amazing.
Guy Ritchie?
He's a guy. I don't know.
Is he like a comedian?
No. Director, writer.
Okay, I got you. I'm writing it down. We shall, because the last show that you recommended was Mwah. So I think
What was that?
your recommendation can be trusted. Chef's kiss, man. It was a chef's kiss. All right, Mike. Anything? Nothing?
No picks from me.
Okay. Come. My
Very
pick
direct.
is come see us at NGConf next week. We'll be flying out next week, and Kendo UI still a promo code if you want 50% off online ticket, in-person ticket. Anything else? Anybody else? Picks
Analog 1.0.
Oh,
I love what Brandon does there. So
do we have a
that
link?
needs to be
We have a
picked.
link.
I think you released it today or yesterday. What was it, like yesterday?
I saw something yesterday.
Yeah, I feel like it was yesterday. Yeah. Zeet, whatever.
Really cool stuff.
Oh no! Can we not say tweet anymore? Okay.
I'm still saying tweet.
Yeah.
I kind of got away from it, to be honest.
They're gonna have to try real hard to get rid of that one. Well, thank you so much for coming on. It was a wonderful episode, and I honestly am just praying the delivery of your third little one is smooth sailing, and we will miss you. But
yeah, for sure.
hopefully everything is perfectly fine, and enjoy the newborn. But thank you.
Yeah, it's gonna be crazy.
I know. I'm like kind of getting a little like anytime I hear like a young baby cry, I'm like, someone pick it up. Oh, well, thank you, darling, and thank you, chat. You were all beautiful today, and we'll see you on the next one. Bye, everybody.
All right. Bye. Thanks.
Angular Air is sponsored by Kendo UI for Angular. We have over 100 components built from the ground up in Angular or each framework and library that it's built for. So not only do we have Angular on the JavaScript side, but we have Kendo UI for React, jQuery, and Vue as well. And if you're on the .NET side of life, we have things for Blazor, Maui, WPF, and so much more. All of our libraries are themable, customizable, and of course come with killer professional support. So try it out for free today at kendoui.com.